Hello, everyone. My name is Mike and from Wordbee, and today I would like to talk about order forms and process automation with you. I hope everyone can hear me. If you have any questions during the course of this webinar, you can simply ask your question in the question bar. I will answer them either during my talk whenever they fit to the topic. If not, I would like to just answer the questions after the whole webinar, just to maintain the flow a little bit. So let's just start with the first introduction. So as many of you might know, there are like 4 project managers in translation departments or in translation service providers. There are 3 important levels of handling basically a whole translation workflow. And this is the order, which is basically what the client is ordering from a certain translation language provider, a translation service provider, or a localization department in the company. Then the project, which is basically used to manage the whole workflow in terms of the project manager. And then in the end, the jobs where all the translators and linguists are working in order to translate, do the proofreadings, or do certain other jobs associated to the whole project. Of course, what would be ideal is if every step along the way is synchronized. So if something happens in the order, it will be reflected in the project and ideally also in the job. And also the other way around, that if all the jobs are completed and a certain change happens in the project, that this is also reflected in the order. And this can be done basically by the automation of order forms and project workflow templates. Some of you who own Wordbee may not have this order overview, because this is basically for bigger companies that really have to handle the whole order management for translation requests in their whole company, or also for language service providers that have different clients that want to order translations from them. So in order to just have a quick overview what is possible with order forms, we will just go through a very simple workflow in order to show what kind of automation is possible. So in order for a client to order a translation, basically just can log into the client portal. So we have Max Müller from one of the client's company who can just log in and click on new order in order to request a new translation. So we have the Acme test order form, which has been created by the translation service provider. And basically here, he can choose from 3 different workflows that have been pre-configured for him. So we have the simple translation and proofreading. He can order machine translation and post editing, and he can also order full automation. And as you can already see, when you look at the mask, you can see here, he can choose Arabic and Chinese, and he can choose different domains. And if you go to the MT workflow, then you see he cannot choose any domains, and the language selection is already restricted. So he doesn't have Arabic anymore, but actually only like some European languages. So yeah, so this is all what is pre-configured already. So let's say he wants to have a fully automated workflow, which we will show later on also from the project manager side. As a reference, you just can name the project like test 1. The deadline could be day after tomorrow at 11:30. And the source language for the document he wants to translate is German. Target language is English. And the domain is marketing. So what he can now do is simply drag and drop the documents he wants to have translated here. Also upload reference material if needed, and give some instructions about terminology, the selected workflow, or also some hints about the whole project. If he hits next, the whole document or all the documents that have been uploaded will be word counted and processed. So based on the word count, the system will, and also the repetitions within the document, the system will now calculate an offer also based on a price list that has been attached to the client prior. So here the client can see like how many words are in the documents that he wants to translate, their identical pre-translations, that is translation memory hits from translation memories, and then the fuzzy matches, which are basically the repetitions within the documents he uploaded and the amount of characters. It also gets a small overview over the whole project, what the parameters he set, and also an instant quote. So here you can see the costs excluding VAT, the VAT rate, and then the total pricing. In order to now confirm the order, he has to accept the terms and conditions, which you can also set in the order form, what kind of terms and conditions he will be able to see. And he can simply confirm the order. So now the system will create the whole workflow and the project already for the project manager. That is, until now, like the project manager hasn't done anything, like he hasn't set up a project or didn't have any work. This is what the client does basically for the provider. So, and this is it for now. Like the client can see the order details and that his status is on request, and he can access the cost if he wants to. So going back to the project manager, he will receive an email with the new order coming in, and the new order will also pop up in his order overview. So here's test 1, the request. So he may now analyze the file and also some project parameters and send the proposal with the costs that have been automatically calculated if there's nothing that he has to change, right? So you can just click on send proposal, send a nice message, and hit OK. In that moment, the client will receive an email that the proposal has been sent, and when the client goes back to his portal, he can simply click on accept proposal. Accept the terms and conditions again. And in that moment, the project manager will get the approval for continuing with the project. So when we refresh the page, you can see that the status jumped to in progress. Within the project manager can now handle the whole project. And we see that the parameters set by the client are already in place. So when the order has been received, when the deadline is, the different language combinations, and the domain. Furthermore, already all the resources have been attached to the project. So like the translation memories, the term bases that are attached to the workflow will automatically be set here and also used for the word count. So the word counts are always based on the translation memory hits that already exist. The project manager can also have a look at the source document and of course on the counts and cost for clients and the suppliers. In the jobs overview, we now see that an automated workflow has already been created. That is, we have here a job for translation, proofreading, and quality control. Those jobs are currently inactive because it has been set by the workflow. You can also directly activate the whole workflow when the order comes in. And we can also see that there are 3 suppliers mentioned here that would receive this job. And the first one to accept is the one who will then carry out the job. So if the project manager changes the job status to not started and sends out the email notifications, then people, like the 3 people, will get a notification about a new job opening. Those suppliers can then just hit translate, have a look at the text, and decide to take the job. And then the translation process starts. So I will not translate the whole file. That's why I will just machine translate it with DeepL real quick. So the machine translation basically now just filled out all the different segments. So the translator has done his work. He can simply complete the work, the job. So, and when we refresh this page here, we can see that this job has been set to completed, and the next job has been set to not started and be sent to the other 2 suppliers that are queued up for the proofreading part. And so it just continues. So when we complete the proofreading, it goes to quality control. And if the quality is completed, the whole project will be completed and the final file directly sent into the order document for the client to pick up. So in that way, we have a fully automated workflow from order, like from the reception of the order until the final delivery. So, but of course, the question now is like, how do we set all this process and process automation up? And this is what we want to talk about now. So the whole order process automation can be found in the settings. If you look for new order form, this is basically the feature that enables those kind of automation processes. As you can see here, we have the Acme test order form. This is the one we have currently used in the examples. So we see again, translation includes translation proofreading, machine translation post-editing, and full automation. So those are the 3 workflows that have already been in place, and we just use the full automation workflow. So in order to show how those are set up, I will just add a completely new workflow or order form. So we could call it Acme 2 order form, and then we will just start. So the header information is basically a kind of introductional message the client will receive. So if we go back to the client portal and just order something new, you can see that right now it's please fill in the form below to ask us for a translation or quote. But we can also include all the information we want. So please fill out the form. If you have any questions, contact us. So in that way, you can customize also how to approach your clients or the different departments in your company. You can also introduce a help link for that just guides the users to a certain to a certain web page where you can get a detailed instruction how to do things. You can also include the terms and conditions in an URL, and you can also decide how much help you give to the users. So here, if you click that option, then you get help icons. So whenever you are in the order form and you don't know what a domain is, you can simply click here, and then it says, please specify a subject domain, and basically explains what is needed from the client in that place. So we, of course, like if we have an external client, we always want him to be able to get as much context as possible. Then we have the log selection option, and if that is ticked, you can basically see what kind of workflow the client has the client has chosen in the order flow details. So we had 3 options, like the full MT, the translation and proofreading, and the MT and post editing. So, and when we go to the order, which we just created, test 1, we can see that the option we selected is full automation. So this is basically a little bit of context for the project manager, so he at one glance can see what the client has ordered with what workflow, in case some workflows are really similar to each other. So as this is very helpful, we will also tick this. So for the new option, this is we first have to have a name, and it always is recommendable that you choose something the client can really work with, or certain abbreviation that works for your company. So the first thing we have to, of course, keep in mind is like what kind of workflow we want to establish. So what I want to show right now is that we have a workflow based on translation of the text that is coming in, then the revision by a second native, and a proofreading by an internal person from the client company. So not an internal translator, but actually someone you don't have to pay because it's just kind of an extra service. We just call this translation, including revision and proof. So we can then choose if we want to do just a regular work that would be a normal translation workflow, or an interpretation or appointment. So you can also automate the creation of interpretation tasks, for instance, or some consulting and some consulting sessions, or maybe workshops. But I won't show that now because like the principles are the same. It's just a little bit less options. That's why I will talk about normal workflows for translations right now. So first thing you can give is a description of, like a first small description of what this whole workflow entails. So here we can simply say this option includes translation, included revision, and proofreading by the client. So this will then be shown whenever the workflow is being chosen. So here, those small introduction or descriptions are set in that field. You can then give a little closer or more information about this. For instance, the proofreading will be done by Max Müller or something. So there's like some more into detail, or you just explain like the different processes a little bit better. This is completely up to you how much context and information you want to give to the client. So, and below this option, we now have to set up general settings, order settings, and the order settings for the managers. So the general settings are some information that are needed for the automation. Every automation process, of course, needs some parameters to define how it works. So the first thing we have to set up is the word count profile. The word count profile is responsible for how words are counted. So if numbers will be included or not included, or if Asian characters will be shown, or if Asian characters will be shown or not, if Asian characters will be counted, if you have for several languages. And then you have, and you can of course customize this. So what kind of characters will be counted, how the fuzzy matches will be evaluated. So you can also can see how the similarities are counted. You can also see how pre-translations are handled or machine translations. So this is all you can set up. This is like a whole different story for another webinar. So I will just go with our normal character count, including numbers. So the next thing are the resource groups. Resource groups are basically the kind of resources you want to attach to each project. In order to customize those, you can simply click on View Groups. And if we have a look at one, you can see that they're grouped translation memory and terminology databases. So we have the resource group Acme Resources, and what is part of those resources is the master memory and the terminology database for Acme. Of course, you can also add different resources that will also automatically be chosen for the supplier, for the workflow. In order to attach a certain resource group to the general settings, just choose the resource group you would like to have there. In the machine translation, you can pre-translate or you can set a machine translation as a first step of a workflow. So basically, you can have a machine translation done by Google, Microsoft Empty Hive, or DeepL as a first step, and then put post-editing steps or automated post-editing steps after this machine translation. As this is not part of our workflow, we will just leave that one blank. So the next thing is also very important, is the document format profile. So here you can define what kind of documents the client can actually upload. So of course, Wordbee supports a lot of file types, and sometimes you really want to restrict like what your client can upload. So for instance, what we can do is just set up a workflow where we just allow Microsoft Word files, and you can also set the filter that is used in this workflow. So for instance, if the file has, or if all the files by the client are created by OCR, then we can have a certain filter for that. Or if you don't want to include client comments in the Word file or embeddings, you can simply choose the kind of filter you want to use in that workflow. And of course, that works also for all the other kinds of files like JSON, XML, or all the other file types that are supported. You can use the parser that you want for a certain file type. So let's say our client is only allowed to upload Microsoft Word files with a default setting. Next thing we can decide is how many, how big the file size can be that can be uploaded, and a maximum is set to 1000 megabit and a maximum of 60 files that can be uploaded at the same time. In this option, you can basically choose if the user can set deadlines individually per file. So if you have 40 files, for instance, you can set a different deadline for every file. If you don't want to allow this, you can just untick the box. You can also authorize the client to upload files that are not supported by Wordbee, like picture files like JPEG or zip files. In that regard, the whole invoicing process, of course, doesn't work because Wordbee cannot calculate a text out of a picture, for instance. So for automized processes, this might not be the ideal option, but if you want to allow your clients to upload it, you can simply tick the box and then analyze the files later. The next box is the error box. So if you tick that one, then error details will be added to the internal comments field whenever something goes wrong. So for instance, if Wordbee can't files an uploaded JPEG file, it will say that the JPEG file could not be parsed. or that some other error happened, and this will work as an information for the project manager to see potential errors, or also to see what kind of files he still has to take care of. So this is all. These are all some settings that are basically very important in order to define what kind of workflows and files can be uploaded. In the next step, we really go into the workflow details. So whenever a client is ordering something, he can, the whole order can be sent to request, proposal, or in progress. What does it mean? Basically that if the client uploads a file and you still want to adapt the quote accordingly, you can first decide that the whole quote will first be a request, then be approved by the project manager, and only if approved by it, be sent to proposal send. This is the workflow that we just did, where someone requested something, the project manager accepted it, and then approved it, and then the client actually accepted the quote. Another thing is, if the client has very basic files that will always work, you can simply send the project, the whole order status to proposal. So the client only has to confirm the proposal, or if you really have a trusted client that always pays and you have like kind of a contract with him, you can also simply just put everything into in progress. As we only allow Word files that are parsed in a very basic way and don't allow like files that are not supported, we will just go with the option that the order will be set to in progress right away. So, but right now we only took care of all the order settings, but we have not actually taken care of the projects. So this is what we do here. If we take the button here, there will be a project created to every order that is submitted. And here we can decide if we want to create a standard or a coded job, and how the initial project status is. Again, if you first need to prepare something, it can be preparing. If you're still waiting for the proposal to be accepted, the status can be waiting. Or if everything jumps to in progress, what we have here, we can just leave it. We can directly set it to in progress and don't have to wait for any external approval. So I will just do a standard project, but I will also explain how coded workflows can be beneficial here. So for the project workflow, we have some predefined settings, but of course, nothing of what we want to do, which is the translation, revision, and proofreading. So what we first have to do is create a template. So let's just view what templates are available and add a new one. So this one we will just call translation plus revision plus client proofreading. Here we can also add a description for the project manager so they know what kind of workflow this is supposed to be, to give context in case you have hundreds of them. So you can also limit your workflow to a certain client, or you can leave it open for any client. This is completely up to you. So our workflow is pretty much done with the preset almost. So we have a translation and a revision, but of course we want to have the client proofreading. So we just add the task of proofreading. And by clicking on the arrows up and down, we can arrange the different workflow steps. So in here, we can also define how the jobs are assigned. So you can manually assign all the jobs, or you can also propose everything to either a group of suppliers. That's what the automated workflow did before. You can crowdsource the jobs to a group of suppliers, so they will work on a certain project at the same time, or you can assign something to the client company. So for the first step, of course, we want to assign it to a group of suppliers, and we can then find out to what suppliers we want to send it to. So first, we want to send it to our internal translators to keep costs low. And when they do not react within 2 hours, it will be sent to a second group, that is the marketing group. Okay. Then we can decide if the client can follow the work process in the order. So he will get a little button with how many tasks have been completed and with what percentage. You can also include the working deadlines and completion dates. As we are working very close together with the client in this case, I will just include this. You can also decide that the jobs can only be completed after an error-free QA check. So without a QA check, a translator or linguist cannot complete the job. You can also say what profile has to be used for that check. So you can simply demand a terminology check or spell check or data number check, or you can use your own QA profiles in order to define what kind of check is necessary to complete a job. So let's say we just want to have a spell check here. And the next step, the next button is actually to have workflows with different ways. So you can, for instance, put in the option, okay, if a certain amount of words is pre-translated, then, so let's say if more than 90% of the text is pre-translated, then use this step. If not, use another one. So those are like some of the conditions you can set in order to see like what kind of step will follow in the workflow. But we don't need that right now. And we can also set up that there's a QA automatically run after the job has been set to completed. So for instance, we could make an automated data number check, and whenever there are issues, the segments will be marked red, and the proofreader or reviser will then see that there are still problems and can directly fix them in the system. So for the next revision job, we will also use our internal groups. We will just send it to all suppliers we have. The client can again view the work process and can see the working deadline. And for the last step, of course, we want to automatically assign it to the client company so that the internal reviser in their company can work on the translation. So what are the numbers here on the right? So the first number is always the amount of time that is in between the several steps. So from the order, from submitting to the order to the translation, the time will be like 2 hours. And between the translation and revision will be another 2 hours, and maybe for the internal proofreading 8 hours because it's not an internal process. And we can also say how many words a day will be translated. So translated maybe 2,000, proofread maybe 8,000, and revised 8,000, and the client can do 5,000 words a day in proofreading. So why is this important? Because we have an automatic deadline calculation. Like from this workflow numbers, we can directly calculate the deadlines. So from the capacity and word counts, it will calculate based on these numbers and the times in between steps when a project can be completed. You can also just take it from the project or file deadline, which we have set in the order, or we can just set it manually. I want to have it automatically calculated by the time and word counts we have here. And we can also decide that we can send email alerts to suppliers if a deadline approaches. So like 2 hours before the job is due, the system will automatically send a reminder to the translator to take care of the job. We can also decide if the costs will be calculated. So if the jobs are assigned manually, it should be automatically costed or not. I really prefer that because then you directly see how much money the translator gets. Then you can also propose it to a group of suppliers, and the costs will automatically be created for the first one who accepts the job. So in case you set up a second version of the file you have already translated, you can also define a different workflow or just keep the workflow we have here. I will just choose to keep it. And you can also decide that the audit status changes with the project status. So as soon as the project is completed, the order will also be set to work done, and the client will be notified that the translation work has been done. This is a pretty nifty way of not having to manually do it, so I will just include it. As soon as your workflow is done, you just hit OK, and it will be saved here. Of course, I promised to also show the coded project overview, because there are some things that you can do here that you can't do with standard projects. The first thing is that you can delete jobs whenever a previous step is done. So basically, whenever the revision has been done, the translation job will be deleted. So this is something in case you want to clean up your job list and do everything with internal translators, then you can just have a clean slate, basically. So then we see all the options we already know from the standard projects. The deadline calculation is still there. The cost calculation is still there. But what you can do here is automatically create and manage supplier invoices. So whenever a quote, whenever a job has been accepted, a quote and an invoice will already be created. And as soon as a job is being set to completed, the whole invoice status will automatically jump to invoice draft in order for your finance department to send out the supplier costs. You can also decide in coded jobs that you immediately start newly created workflows. So, so to not wait and waste time. So, and then also you can see like what workflow completion options you have. So you can automatically create and save the translated file, so you don't have to do it manually. So as soon as the last step in the workflow is done, the final file will be created. Then you can also set up that the master memory will be consolidated. So the project memory will be consolidated in the master memory, and you can also automatically copy the translated file for delivery into the order. So there's a lot of things you can automate in coded jobs that are not automizable in standard jobs. What you can also do is if you have job openings for different jobs in a workflow, is that you can also set that one supplier can only do one job per workflow, or that one supplier cannot do two jobs in sequence. So in that case, translation revision, we could basically say that translation and revision have to be done by two different people, or you don't have any restrictions at all. This is basically up to you and your workflow. One thing that is also really nifty, for each work step, you can see set up a standard view the translator sees. So if you click on these editor columns here, you can basically decide what kind of information the translator sees. So by default, this is of course the source and the target language, but you can also give other meta information like descriptions or images if they're provided somehow. So if you have a description for every source document, you can include this row, and in the multi-column editor, the translator will not only see the cat column for source and target language, but also a column for the description or comments or whatever you decide to give him here. Okay, but let's go back to our workflow, which order form we create here. We just created the project workflow, like this template, but it's still not in the list. This is because this page hasn't been updated since we created the workflow. So I will just save the ACME2 order form by clicking OK, opening it again, and then just select the workflow we have just created, the translation, revision, client proofreading. So here we have to tick a button if we want to mark the files that have already been submitted through the order form should be automatically marked for online translation, which of course we want to do because we want to have an automated workflow. Here we say if you want to create jobs automatically, which we also want to do because we created a wonderful workflow. And then we can decide if we want to start the jobs automatically or not. I will just not automate this, but only leave it as it is. So as we have said in the project workflow, our deadline will be calculated by calculating how many words a day per workflow are done and the amount of words that are actually there. So we have a calculated deadline, which of course doesn't have to match the supplier, the client's deadline. So clients tend either to not to give not enough time or to give too much time. So what you could do here, whenever there is a big discrepancy between calculated and client deadline, you can simply extend if the deadline if it's too short, or shorten it if it's too long. So in that regard, it will calculate a time in between the calculated and the client deadline. And of course, a big issue is that if the client has set a deadline that is too short, we can automatically extend it by, let's say, 100%, 200%, so like 2 times longer. But of course, you also want to notify the client that such a deadline extension has taken place, and if he's not happy with that, he can still get in contact with you. So the next thing is the costing. So here you decide if you want to create an invoice for the client immediately. This is of course very convenient. So I want to create an invoice if all files were could be word counted. And the first invoice status that I want to have is quote accepted, because the whole job will be set into progress right away. So the quote will directly be accepted. Of course, if the first invoice status would be order status would be request, then we could just draft the invoice, or if the first order status is proposal, so the client already received the quote, then the first invoice status could be quote sent. But of course, as we directly start our workflow here in progress, we will send it to quote accepted. So here, whenever we have problems to parse certain files and extract the text, then the system can just stop creating an invoice or just continue based on the text you could actually work with. So here we can decide if we want to just stop the whole invoicing the creation of a quote, or if you want to leave it as it is. Then we can also see decide if we want to show the counts and costs step. So like this overview with the amount of fuzzy matches, pre-translations, and the amount of words, and also like the quote that has already been calculated. Here you can decide if the client is able to see that or not. So if you do not choose to show it, then the client will not see it in the second step. But I want our client to see the cost details, as he will accept them right away in the second step of the order process. Of course, in order to create a quote, we first have to define the price list. And The price list I chose here is the standard price list, which is kind of a problem because if we go to the client, which will be software producer, you can see that the price lists that are available to the client is only price list audiovisual and price list 140. So the standard price list is not attached to the client. In that case, the system will just not be able to create an automated quote and invoice because the client is not assigned to the price list. So here you have to make sure to really choose the price list that is also assigned to the client. So we know that price list 140 is assigned to the client, so we can use it here. Okay, last thing in this category are the services. So those are the services that actually get quoted. So for in our case, we want the client to be quoted for the translation and the revision, but not for the proofreading, because the proofreading is done by an employee of our client, and in that way, of course, we don't have to pay an external supplier. So what we can do here, we can just add the services that will be quoted to the client. So we only want to have translation revision quoted, but not the proofreading. So we only add those two services here. Okay, now we are in the second option in the order settings. And this is basically what the client can see whenever he orders things. So if you will be able to set a reference or not, this is basically something he has to give in order to get some information. For each category you enable, you can also put in a help message in order to support the client whenever there are questions. So you can also see if he can set a deadline or not, if it's just visible or required a requirement. You can also set the minimum lead time. This is basically how many days can be, how many hours can be between the submission of the order and the actual and the actual delivery. So you can say, okay, I need 24 hours to complete any project. Then the client can only set a deadline within 24 hours. You can also set a default hour, which is basically whenever the client only chooses a delivery date, but not a time that will be chosen for delivery. Then a delivery time, this is your opening hours basically. So you cannot deliver outside of your opening hours. So the deadlines will be automatically extended after 5 o'clock for 10 a.m. the next morning. You can also set domains for the client can set domains. So here you can choose what kind of domains you can see. So maybe business and finances, engineering, law, and marketing, and you don't want him to see all the other domains that he can choose. You can also pre-select certain domains. If your client always has 90% of the client's orders, for instance, are in a certain domain, you can just pre-select that for him, so he doesn't have to click it every time. Then you can also decide what source languages he can see. So I will just go for English and German. Here. Then also what kind of target languages you can see. I will just go for the same language pairs because in that way, as you can see, like there's quite an extensive list of varieties and languages available. So your client doesn't have to actually scroll through all of them every time he wants to order something. You can also pre-select a certain language pair for your client if you want to. Then, of course, we require to upload files because without a file, the project will not be kicked off because nothing has been set for online translation. You can also enable the upload of reference material, and you can also decide if instructions can be sent by the client. This is basically, if you look from the client side, this is basically all the categories we see here or don't see here. Always depending on what you decided. In the order settings for manager, you can also add some information. So if not the client is ordering something, but your project manager, because you got an email from a client, for instance, and now wants to use an automated order form, you can simply also add some information like the date the email was received instead the date it has been uploaded to the system, internal comments from the project manager, and you can also automatically select a project manager for everyone here, or see if it's required in the first step. In the last step, you can basically decide what kind of information from the order are automatically transferred to the project. So for instance, if you want to have the instructions from the order taken over to the project, then we can just use the placeholders here. So the order instructions will be sent to the project as well. The internal comments from the order we also want to have in the project. And we can see if we want to copy the deadline from the order, which we don't want to because we have a workflow in place which automatically creates the deadline. We can also see if you want to copy the reception date, which we want to because the creation date of the order and the project is probably the same. And we can decide if the project manager is the same as the order manager or if we want to have someone else. So now our order form is ready. And the only thing we have to do, we have to go to the client and attach the new order form here in the client overview client portal and just attach the new order form to the client. So whenever the client now wants to order something, I guess we just have to log off and in again. Oh. Well, we have the new order form attached. Ah, yeah. I'm not quite sure. I think I forgot one step here. Because actually, like, this should be the only option that is available right now. Well, the only thing that I can explain it with is that it takes a while to actually update the order forms in use. So let me log out and in again. Otherwise, we will just have to wait some time in order for the change to take effect, I think. Okay, yeah, I think this is nothing that works right away. I think there's some updating that needs to be done, but after a while, it should take effect. Maybe we can just skip to the questions real quick, and maybe during that time, it will update the order form. So are there any questions from the audience? Ah, yeah, I see that. So if there are no questions, I will just show you something else for the last 5 minutes. Whenever you have something, just write them in the panel. So as we have still some time, the workflow templates, there are some special workflow templates that have been created for certain industries. So in some industries, like for transcreation or in the medical appliances industries, back translations are really important, or parallel translations. So we have preset workflows here that only work for coded, of course, where we can set back translation workflows. Back translation workflows. So here, for instance, we have one workflow that is a translation into the target language, then the back translation into the source language, but from a different person, and then the back validation, where you basically compare the first source and the last target language. So for this, in order to work, we of course have to create a coded job because standard jobs only support source and target languages, but not really working back and forth languages. This is what coded projects are for, because they're only working languages exist, and you can translate from one working language to another one into a third one. And what you can see here, if you click on the editor columns, is that the first translator will see the columns source and target language. Then the back translator will only see the target language and will translate into the source language version 2, which he will create. And the person in the third step will actually see the first text, the source language, and the back translated text in order to see if the translations match. And in that way, through this workflow templates, you can basically create a lot of workflows in the different with your different requirements. So I will try to log in once more. Hope it will work now. Nope. I think it will just take some time. But basically, after some time, Max Miller should be able to only order the new workflow that we have created. I really would like to show it to you. Maybe I can do it in the manager's view. Yeah, because like in the manager's view, it's already taken over. You can see here, we don't have the selection of 3 workflows anymore, but only of 1, because you have only the 1 selection available. So we call it test 2. The deadline is the 10th. Source language, we only define 2. German, we want to translate it into English. The only domains we have are the 4 we selected. Let's just take marketing. We will then upload the files and hit next. Now it's counting the words again. It automatically created the quote. And if we confirm the order, it will automatically set the order to in progress. Here, the order is automatically in progress. We can track the work progress here. So we see 0 out of 3 tasks are completed. You can see it divided by translation, proofreading, and revision as we set it up. In the work progress button, you can also see more detailed information. And here we see that the instructions, so like options selected in the order form, will be transmitted as it has been in the order instructions previously. We can also see the tasks, which we will see later in the jobs as well. In the resources, we see in the memory we have attached. We can see the jobs with the job opening already being sent out in the proposal stage to 5 people. And in the cost, and also like to the software producer for revision. And in the cost, we can see when we open the quote that only the translation and the revision have been counted, but not the proofreading. So it's not included in the quote. So this is the workflow we have set up so far. And if there aren't any questions anymore, I would just close the webinar. I thank you all for being here. And yeah, have a good night.